The president and his team seem hell-bent on finding something, anything that they could use to exact revenge against me and my family.
Well, this interview you're about to watch is truly astonishing. This whistleblower exposes the petty lengths that Donald Trump's administration has gone to exact revenge against this man's family just because he criticised the president. Let's not waste any time and get right into it. I'll give my full thoughts at the end of the clip.
I came out against the president from within his own administration. I went into the first Trump administration to work at the Department of Homeland Security. I had gone into government after 9/11 to serve my country. I'm a lifelong Republican. But when I got into that administration, not only did I not like what I saw, I was very alarmed by what I saw because on a regular basis, the president's every move was erratic. And so I published an opinion piece in the New York Times from within the administration, first anonymously, expressing how volatile it was in the administration and that the president's own cabinet members felt like he was unfit for office. And eventually I came forward, I quit the administration and unmasked myself because I felt like it was important to own those words in my own name.
I'll come back to that if I may. I want you to give our audience an insight into how your life, your friends' lives have been impacted since this investigation, since this executive order was signed by the president.
Well, Victoria, that's why I'm here with you guys tonight. And a lot of folks had advised me not to, right? To just lay low and hope that it blows over. But I think it's important for people to understand what's happening right now in the United States. These orders that go out are not just symbolic, they're not just pieces of paper. They absolutely destroy people's lives. And in our own case, since that order on April 9th, it forced me to leave my job, and I'm the single income earner in my household, which meant that my wife, who's a stay-at-home mother with our baby, has had to return to work so that financially we can support ourselves, so that we don't lose our home in what we expect to be a very long legal fight. We've had to launch a legal defense fund to raise money to be able to sustain that legal defense. And we've even had friends that have been fired from the executive branch simply because they're associated with us. In fact, a senior official at the Department of Homeland Security...
Seriously? Is that true?
Yeah, a senior official at DHS was fired the other week because the White House found a photo of him at our wedding. They found a photo of him as an attendee at our wedding.
You are joking.
And they fired him from his job.
Sorry, can I just be clear? Sorry, Mr. Taylor, to interrupt. You're saying that your friend who works at the Department of Homeland Security was fired simply because there was a photograph of him at your wedding. That cannot be the reason that person was fired. Seriously?
Well, I'd like to say that I'm the one who's mistaken, but White House officials confirmed that's why he was fired. And to me, that's just an extraordinary example of how far this administration is willing to go to exact revenge. It's not enough for it just to be about me and people who've criticized the president. They want to shut up critics by showing that if you even associate with them, you too will be targeted.
Why do you say you have had to leave your job because of this?
Well, honestly, you know, this is what you would call modern day blacklisting. It makes it almost impossible to go work with companies and advise them because then they are fearful of potentially being targeted by the White House. And that's what I've done for a number of years. I do private consulting, I work with technology companies, but it's not possible to continue that work right now in Washington, D.C. when you're blacklisted by the President of the United States. And then you add into that, Victoria, after that happens, you get a range of threats. And we dealt with this several years ago when I came forward against Donald Trump, but since then we've had individuals dox us, share our personal information online, send very violent threats towards me and my wife and our child. We've had family members who are so fearful of the threats that they too have distanced themselves from us because our own family members are concerned that they will be in the crosshairs. And just the other day, my wife and I were advised to sit down and update our last will and testament to name a guardian for our daughter in case the worst happens. That's correct. Yeah, we went...
Okay, so just so I'm clear, in case the worst happens, what are you saying?
Well, I mean, security folks that I've talked to have, reviewed some of the threats that we faced, and, the worry is that some of these individuals who've been sharing our information online are trying to get people to show up at our home, trying to get people to show up where we are, and God forbid that results in an act of violence. And so we were told that the safe move would be, we need to name a guardian for our daughter in case that happens. And I mean, keep in mind, Victoria, nothing's really happened yet except the executive order. The president has announced charges against me. This is the aftermath of just him signing his name to a piece of paper that says I'm a traitor and that says I'm to be investigated by his administration. It has completely detonated our lives.
And is it true that people you went to school with are being contacted?
We've received indications that all the way back to people I went to high school with are being reached out to for interviews. We don't know about what. We don't know what the investigators are looking into. And that's what's extraordinary about this to me and my wife and my family is, normally in the United States, if you're being investigated for a crime, you know what that crime is. But in this case, we don't. And as the Wall Street Journal called it here in the States, it is very much a fishing expedition. The president and his team seem hell-bent on finding something, anything that they could use to exact revenge against me and my family.
Well, let me look at the wording of the executive order and quote from it. And this may give our audience a clue as to why President Trump has signed this thing. The key points allege that you, quote, illegally published classified conversations to sell your book. You disclosed sensitive information obtained through unauthorized methods, possibly violating the Espionage Act. Is any of that untrue?
The entire thing is untrue. In the United States, you don't need a permission slip to criticize the President of the United States. And the opinion piece I wrote, the book I wrote, have been out there for 7 years and 5 years respectively. And they are not sensitive disclosures of information. They are critiques of the President of the United States. And now,
well, let me just
president...
for our audience, I'm so sorry to interrupt, Ms. Taylor, but for our audience, the kind of things you wrote in your book, which was a New York Times bestseller, were things like President Trump in his first term was too distracted to pay attention to intelligence briefings. Donald Trump refused internal recommendations to punish Moscow for interference in US affairs. Donald Trump wanted to swap Puerto Rico for Greenland because it was dirty and the people were poor. Donald Trump tried to block emergency aid for California wildfire victims because it was a democratic state. That's the sort of stuff which he wrote, and which Donald Trump himself has said might mean you could be guilty of treason. Now, in US federal law, that's defined as a betrayal of one's country. How do you plead?
Well, I'll tell you, Victoria, it's also a crime in the United States that's punishable by death. But I would go back to this and say that in this country, criticism is not classified, but the President of the United States, Donald Trump, believes that dissent is subversive. And in fact, ever since I published that first opinion piece, his immediate reaction was to tweet out a 7-letter response in all capital letters, treason, ? So before he had even read what I'd said, he had already decided that I'd committed an act of treason.
The Secretary of Homeland Security, according to this executive order, shall prepare a report with recommendations for appropriate remedial or preventative actions to be taken to protect America's interests. Now, you've already told me that one of your worst fears could potentially be someone, essentially you assassinating you. Is that what you meant, just so I'm clear?
Well, look, it's a really, really volatile moment in the United States, and I'll give you a data point, Victoria, on why I have this concern, because my previous job had been as Chief of Staff at the Department of Homeland Security, and so I was tracking this data very closely. When Donald Trump was first elected in 2015 and then took office in 2016, there were something like 1,000 death threats a year against members of Congress. By the time he left office, that number had swelled to 10,000 death threats a year. There had been a tenfold increase. That has continued. We are seeing a spike in threats to individuals, and especially people that Donald Trump targets. And so we do have a real security worry in our family, but the worry extends beyond us, because this isn't just about Miles Taylor. It was as easy as the stroke of a pen for the President of the United States to order me to be investigated.
How many death threats have you and your family received?
I'm not sure that we've statistically quantified them, but enough serious threats that we've had to undertake major security improvements at our property. And look, at one point, after I came forward against Donald Trump, I was relocated to a safe house in Northern Virginia under armed guard with a pistol on my bedside. I mean, that's how serious it got at one point. And some of those same threat actors have reemerged amidst this.
Okay. Do you also fear jail?
I think that anything is possible right now with this administration, and I do expect at some point that there's a good chance that they will try to bring fake charges against us, charges that aren't based on real evidence or real crimes, but to try to prove a point. In fact, White House officials had said after this order that they did it to send a message. And it was very clear what they meant by that, is send a message to people who would dare to criticize the president, whether inside the administration or outside.
Miles Taylor, thank you very much for talking to Newsnight and to our audience. Thank you.
Thanks, Victoria.
This interview with Miles Taylor is honestly pretty disturbing when you think about what it reveals about how far political revenge can go. What really stands out is how one executive order has basically turned the entire government into a weapon against Taylor and anyone who knows him. The part about firing a government official just for being in a wedding photo, that's wild. We're talking about someone losing their job simply because they were photographed at Taylor's wedding. That's not politics. That's pure vindictiveness taken to an extreme level. Taylor's point about being blacklisted really hits home. Think about it. When criticizing a president means you can't work with companies because they're scared of government retaliation, something's seriously broken. These tech companies won't even hire him as a consultant because they're worried about becoming targets themselves. The personal stuff is just heartbreaking. Having to update your will and name guardians for your kid because you wrote an op-ed, living under armed guard. That's not normal in America. And Taylor mentions that death threats against Congress members went up 10 times during Trump's first term. That context makes his fears feel pretty justified. What really gets me is that this whole investigation seems like a fishing expedition. They're digging back to his high school friends, but nobody can tell Taylor what crime he's supposed to have committed. That's the kind of thing you'd expect in an authoritarian country. Not here. Taylor makes a good point when he says criticism is not classified. Former government officials write tell-all books all the time. It's basically a Washington tradition. Trying to call that treason, which is punishable by death, is a massive overreach that should worry everyone. Here's the thing that really concerns me. If they can do this to someone like Taylor, who has resources and a public platform, what happens to regular people who speak out? The message is pretty clear. Keep your mouth shut or face the consequences. This interview captures something that feels bigger than just one person's story. It's about whether we can still criticize our leaders without fear of having our lives destroyed. That's pretty fundamental to how democracy is supposed to work, and seeing it under attack like this is genuinely scary, Dot. But let me know what you think down in the comments. I'm really keen to get everyone's thoughts on this one, and don't forget to subscribe for more content.